Welcome to the channel, everybody. Today we're diving into a world that's more intense than a 4-hour conversation with Alex Jones after a pot brownie, the world of journalism. Specifically, we're talking about the most dangerous places on Earth to be a journalist. Look, I love a good conspiracy theory as much as the next guy, but there's nothing theoretical about the risks these journalists take every single day. They're out there on the front lines, risking their necks to expose the truth, and that's something we should all respect. So buckle up, folks. We're about to get into the top 5 most dangerous countries for journalists. And trust me, it's some seriously heavy stuff. Kicking off our list at number 5, we've got Mexico. Now Mexico, man, it's got it all. Beautiful beaches, delicious food, rich history, and unfortunately, a whole lot of danger. We're talking about the kind of danger that makes you want to carry a machete and learn Krav Maga. See, Mexico is grappling with these powerful drug cartels, these organizations that operate outside the law, with more money than God and enough firepower to start a small war. And they don't like it when people poke around in their business. Journalists, by their very nature, are professional pokers. They dig up dirt, expose secrets, and shine a light on the dark underbelly of society. And in Mexico, that can get you killed. We're talking about journalists who've been threatened, kidnapped, tortured, even executed for simply doing their jobs. It's a level of brutality that's hard to fathom. These cartels, they operate with impunity, man. They bribe officials, they silence witnesses, and they don't hesitate to eliminate anyone who gets in their way. And it's not just the cartels. Corruption within the government itself adds another layer of danger. It's like trying to navigate a minefield while blindfolded and riding a unicycle. So yeah, Mexico, it's a beautiful country with a rich culture, but for journalists, it's a dangerous, dangerous place. Coming in at number 4 is a country synonymous with conflict, Syria. Now, I don't need to tell you about the horrors of the Syrian civil war. It's been raging for over a decade, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. And for journalists, Syria is like the ultimate test of courage, a war zone where danger lurks around every corner. Imagine this. You're trying to report on a conflict where bombs are dropping, bullets are flying, and everyone seems to have an AK-47. It's a recipe for disaster, a chaotic and unpredictable environment where one wrong step could be your last. You've got the Syrian government, various rebel groups, extremist organizations like ISIS, all vying for control, all with their own agendas. It's a tangled web of alliances and betrayals, and journalists are often caught in the crossfire. They risk being killed by stray bullets, kidnapped by militants, targeted by snipers, you name it. And the worst part? There's nowhere safe to turn. No one to trust. You're constantly looking over your shoulder, never knowing who might be friend or foe. And yet, despite the risks, journalists continue to travel to Syria, driven by a sense of duty to bear witness, to document the suffering, and to hold those in power accountable. It's an incredibly brave, incredibly dangerous job, and these journalists deserve our utmost respect. Chapter 3. At number 3, we have Afghanistan, a country that's been ravaged by war for decades. And with the Taliban back in power, it's become a whole lot more dangerous, especially for journalists. Let's be real, the Taliban, they're not exactly known for their commitment to freedom of the press. In fact, they've got a long and brutal history of silencing anyone who dares to challenge their ideology. Journalists, with their pesky questions and their dedication to uncovering the truth, well, they represent a direct threat to the Taliban's control, and they're treated as such. We're talking about threats, intimidation, arbitrary detention, violence, you name it. Journalists in Afghanistan face it on a daily basis. They're harassed, they're followed, their families are threatened, all in an attempt to silence them. And it's working. Many Afghan journalists, especially women, have been forced into hiding or have fled the country altogether, fearing for their lives. It's a mass exodus of talent, a brain drain that's crippling the country's already fragile media landscape. The Taliban's message is clear: toe the line or face the consequences. And those consequences can be deadly serious. Chapter 4. Number 2 on our list takes us to Yemen, a country locked in a brutal civil war that's been raging since 2014. Imagine a country ripped apart by conflict, where airstrikes are a daily occurrence, where famine stalks the land, and where journalists are caught in the crossfire. Yemen is a humanitarian catastrophe, a living nightmare for its people, and for journalists, it's one of the most dangerous places on Earth. You've got Houthi rebels, the Yemeni government backed by Saudi Arabia, various militias, all fighting for control, all committing atrocities. It's a complex and messy conflict with no easy answers, and journalists are often caught in the middle. They risk being killed by indiscriminate shelling, kidnapped by armed groups, tortured for information. It's a terrifying reality. And because Yemen is so isolated, so off the radar for most of the world, these attacks often go unreported, unpunished. The impunity enjoyed by the perpetrators is staggering. Journalists are seen as expendable, collateral damage in a war that seems to have no end in sight. It's a heartbreaking situation, and it highlights the extraordinary risks these journalists take to bring us the news. Chapter 5. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for, the #1 most dangerous country for journalists, Somalia. Somalia, man, it's like the Wild West on steroids. Decades of conflict, a collapsed government, rampant piracy, and a whole lot of guns have turned this country into a breeding ground for lawlessness and terror. For journalists, Somalia is the ultimate no-go zone, a place where danger is a constant companion and death is a very real possibility. Think about it. You're trying to report in a country where there's no functioning government, no rule of law, just a patchwork of clan-based militias and extremist groups like Al-Shabaab. It's a recipe for chaos, a place where might makes right, and journalists are seen as easy targets. Al-Shabaab in particular has been ruthless in its targeting of journalists. They see them as enemies, as mouthpieces for the West, and they've launched countless attacks on media outlets and individual journalists. We're talking bombings, assassinations, kidnappings. It's a level of violence that's almost unimaginable. And the worst part? It's almost impossible to operate safely in Somalia. There's no protection, no accountability, just the constant threat of violence. It takes a special kind of courage to be a journalist in Somalia, a willingness to stare death in the face and say, "I'm not afraid." These are some of the bravest people on the planet, and they deserve our deepest respect. So there you have it, folks, the top 5 most dangerous countries for journalists. These are the places where reporting the news can cost you your life, where freedom of the press is under constant threat. It's a sobering reminder of the sacrifices these brave individuals make every single day to bring us the truth. They're the unsung heroes of our time, risking everything to shine a light on the darkest corners of the world. So next time you see a news report from a conflict zone, take a moment to appreciate the courage of the journalist who brought you that story. They're the real deal, man, and they deserve our utmost respect.